Incidences now of traditional employment is down to about 50%. That means 50% of people don't do full-time jobs, which means they're gig economy workers, which means banks will probably have a reluctance to lend them money. So that's an acceptance they need to make. We're not having those philosophical conversations as Australians. I don't know. I don't know what you think, Bryce, whether that's fair.
Oh, I think it's fair. But I think to the point, I think when a chicken is breaking out of the egg, if you actually help it out of the egg, it doesn't get through life very well at all, because the struggle is part of the strength that's built, right? And I think that's to your point around young people.
That's a metaphor, yeah.
If they so is it hard to buy a house now? Yes. If you talk to my parents, they'll tell you it's hard. You talk to my grandparents. So across the spectrum, it's always hard. I think what we can acknowledge for younger people now, it's harder to get a deposit. So my view is okay, and because I can show you a bunch of people who have actually said, well, despite that, I'm actually going to get to work and find a way to make this happen. And I think that we are now moving into Australia that I think everyone needs to be you can't push the river on this. It's happening with or without you. And it's like when Australia doesn't necessarily have the traditional class system that you have in sort of Europe, which was based on whoever owned the land was the landlord, and then the people who didn't have the land, that was where the class divided. Well, in Australia, we were the lucky country, and the Great Australian Dream was the norm. But now the Great Australian Dream is not the norm. We're at this sort of tipping point where a lot of people can, but a few too many people can't. And so what we will fast forward 20 years, we will actually have a class divide in this country like what you see in Europe, based on the fact that landlords will continue to be the dividing line. So people can just have a look at that and go, that is not quite the case right now. So do I actually want to buy into the pity party with everyone over here saying I can't get on the property ladder? Or do I just actually want to get to work and do what it takes, to your point with the gig economy or side hustles, or just get super focused on what it takes to get onto the ladder? And then, because once you're on the ladder, we around this table know once you're on the ladder, it becomes easier to stay on the ladder and progress on the ladder, but getting on the ladder is tough. And so that's the message I'd say to young people, that, and yes, we get that the deposit is harder, but get to work and be the chicken that actually fights its way out of the egg on its own, because it's actually going to set you up for a better future.
It's a good way to frame it. And to that point, you know, all these policies come out of government, there are all the rules and regulation around it, but what I'm talking about is leadership on perspective for Australians. Now, everyone says housing is unaffordable. Yeah, mate, I was only looking at it the other day. You can still be buying. I'm just 3 days' time. I'm selling. It settles an apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment in Mount Druitt for $320,000.
Yeah.
Opposite Westfields, walking distance to the train station. That's pretty affordable for most Australians who have a job. So the perspective is the key thing, and this is where we need true leadership, in that we need to shape the attitudes of younger people to understand the property that they start in is not necessarily the property that they're going to raise a family in. That's not necessarily the property they're going to retire in. However, we're still sold this dream that your first home needs to be a $1.6 million house in the Ponds out in the western suburbs of Sydney with 5 bedrooms in it. You know, we're not there. We're so far away from it. And this is even more important than whether or not, you know, there's incentives for developers to build more property or rezoning certain areas to put infill properties. Like, that's all consequence of this, but this is where it really needs to start. But it's not there. It's just
it's not. I mean, but, you know, like in the book, we've got 2 case studies that are about the young struggle, the early struggle, the rent investor or the young professional, the independent person who's trying to get onto that property ladder. And the one thing that they've got in there on their side is time.
Yep.
They're young, you know, and if you start a journey of building out your financial future early enough, you get the benefit of that time and the compounding nature of that. And I think that's, you know, like that's the 6, 7 case studies in the back of the book. They are really all about sort of teaching people that it's plausible, right? And it's relatable. And if other people can do it, why can't I? And not playing the victim, just basically getting on with the program in terms of what that looks like.
I don't see that cycle changing, by the way, because that narrative changing, because the power cycle is too short. So therefore, everything unfolds from that, because we're Gen X around this table, and we can remember what our grandparents did, and they started and they put the newspaper up on the windows, and they eventually saved to borrow for the curtains, and back then they were called the drapes, and but we are now going through the cycle such that the clear millennials and the younger generation, if you're wanting to get into power on short power cycles, I can't see that changing.
No, and the concept's not popular to say to people, "Hey, things are going to be hard. We can help."
No,
you.
And
that's right.
But things are going to be hard, and be
Correct.
comfortable with things being hard. It's actually healthy for you. Back to your chicken sort of coming out of the eggs.
But the reason why there's this groundswell though is because kids are coming out of university, or in the States coming out of college with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and they feel like their chance of the life that we had is no longer possible for them. And so they are thinking about this social democracy as a way of reclaiming that power and, being able to do that. Like, look at what's happening in the New York, mayor elections in terms of the Democrats and the Republicans happening over there. This guy's come out of nowhere and he's promising, effectively supermarkets run by government for cheap food and all of the, free housing, rental freezes. And it's resonating because that younger generation feel like they've lost that opportunity. And so I don't think we can dismiss that, because it's, if they're feeling it, it feels real for them.
what's that quote that you say about when the population works out the lead?
So there's a brilliant quote from Charlie Munger.
That's it.
And Charlie basically says, once the population work out how to vote themselves the money, that's the end of your democracy.
Yeah.
So, and if you look at, there's countless examples. Argentina is probably the classic. If you go back to the late 1800s, this is a nation that's got plenty of land, plenty of natural resources, plenty of natural wonders, like sophistication, smart people, and effectively completely botched their country for the last 120, 130 years, because the politicians come in and say, you want that? I'll give it to you. You want that? I'll give it to you. So they come in on all of these promises of, a better life and more services and all, and the government will, and they blow up. And basically the economy goes broke off the back of the debt. They get hyperinflation, and the whole thing's a mess. And so then you get, someone new coming in like what we've got now, where he's basically just collapsing all of the current infrastructures. He's basically rebuilding the country off a new platform of, guess what? Innovation, entrepreneurialism, and business investment. And if you don't have those things, you actually don't have an economy. And so our economy is in its current state because of the amount of government spending at the federal and state levels. If you strip out all of that government spending and you look at private investment spending, we're well and truly in a deficit. GDP would be down, and we're basically, in a recession. Now, per capita, we're in a recession, but it would be far worse if it wasn't for all that government spending. And obviously, what do they call it? The care economy and all of those. So we are spending an enormous amount of money, and now we've got all pressure with defence, in terms of with an uncertain global outlook. So we've got spending problems, but the only way you can grow that is you have to outgrow to raise that revenue. Otherwise, you tax the crap out of people, and ultimately
which is what's happening right now. And we've just gone through a federal election, and Australia was very clear on who they wanted to have in power. So the sentiment it's a democracy. That's the way they feel as though it should be. Now, and what I would say to that is that we've probably got the crowd in power right now for 2 terms. It's going to take some going for them to change the way Australia voted in
unless they
3
completely
years.
botch.
Unless they completely botch it, or
Botch the
something
economy.
happens way outside of their out of their control globally. So the training wheels are off. The government, they've had their first term. You've seen the Treasurer coming out saying he wants to cut red tape and regulation, all this sort of stuff. I just see more and more rules being put in, particularly around property investment, and that's what this particular show is about. All the clues on how to actually do this and do it well, irrespective, I would say, of the machinations of government, would be in how to retire on $3,000. Like that's timeless.